I'm Samantha Taylor, 34, and 5 years ago my grandmother left me her beautiful Victorian house in Boston. It was supposed to be a blessing, not the curse that's tearing my family apart. My sister Madison has always been jealous, but I never imagined my own parents would demand I sell my home to her for a fraction of its value, or be disowned. What they don't know is that Madison's husband, hotshot CEO Richard, has already set plans in motion for my property that would make him millions. Before I tell you how I discovered what my sister's CEO husband was really planning, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if family drama hits close to home. My grandmother Eleanor was more of a mother to me than my own mom ever was. While my parents climbed corporate ladders, attending endless business dinners and flying to conferences, Grandma Eleanor was the one attending my school plays and helping with science projects. Her Victorian house on Marlborough Street became my sanctuary, a place where I felt truly seen and loved. The house itself is magnificent, 3 stories of history and charm, with intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and a small garden that somehow thrives despite being nestled between tall brick buildings. It had been in our family for 3 generations, originally purchased by my great-grandfather after he immigrated from Ireland and built a successful construction business. The walls held decades of family stories, from Prohibition-era secret gatherings in the hidden basement room to my grandmother's childhood during World War II. Madison, my sister, had a different relationship with Grandma Eleanor. 2 years younger than me, Madison was always more aligned with our parents' values, success, appearances, and financial achievement. While I spent weekends baking cookies with Grandma and learning to garden, Madison was attending etiquette classes and later, networking events. It wasn't that Grandma loved her less, they simply connected differently. When Grandma was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I took a leave of absence from my teaching job to care for her. Those final 3 months were filled with both heartache and precious moments, evenings spent looking through old photo albums, mornings in the garden planting flowers she wouldn't live to see bloom, and nights when I'd hold her hand as she shared wisdom and family secrets. Samantha, she told me one evening as the sun set through her bedroom window, this house needs someone who understands its heart. Someone who won't see it as just property or an investment. I didn't realize at the time that she was explaining her decision to leave me the house. I assumed the property would be divided between Madison and me, or perhaps sold with the proceeds split among family members. When Grandma passed, the family gathered in the oak-paneled study with her attorney, Mr. Hoffman, a kind man with silver hair who had handled our family's legal matters for decades. He adjusted his glasses and began reading the will, distributing various items, jewelry to my mother, some investments to my father, and her art collection to Madison, who had always admired Grandma's taste. Then came the surprise. To my granddaughter Samantha Taylor, I leave my home at 247 Marlborough Street, Boston, including all furnishings and contents therein, with the hope that she will continue to fill it with love and preserve its history. The silence in the room was deafening. I sat stunned, tears flowing freely down my cheeks. Madison's face flushed red, her lips pressed into a tight line. My parents exchanged glances I couldn't quite interpret. "Is this legal?" my father finally asked. Mr. Hoffman nodded firmly. "Completely." Mrs. Eleanor Taylor was of sound mind when she made these decisions. The property transfers directly to Samantha, free and clear. Madison stood abruptly. "Congratulations," she said, her voice tight. "That's quite a windfall for a teacher's salary." She left the room, her husband Richard following after giving me what seemed like a calculating look. My parents were surprisingly accepting at first. "Your grandmother always did have a soft spot for you," my mother said with a sigh. "I'm sure you'll take good care of the place." That first year, I poured my heart, soul, and savings into respectfully renovating the house. I preserved the original woodwork while updating the plumbing and electrical systems. I converted the third-floor maid's quarters into a beautiful home office where I could prepare my teaching materials. Every choice was made with both preservation and practicality in mind. Meanwhile, Madison's life continued on its upward trajectory. Her husband Richard was promoted to CEO of Blackwell Development, a company known for luxury condominiums and commercial properties throughout Boston. They moved into a penthouse in Back Bay, drove matching luxury cars, and vacationed in places where celebrities were spotted. On the surface, she had everything. But whenever she visited my home, I noticed a certain wistfulness in her eyes as she ran her fingers along the banister our grandmother had polished for decades. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at the stained glass window on the landing, the one that cast rainbow patterns across the floor on sunny afternoons, the same spot where we'd played as children during visits to Grandma's. "You're lucky," she said once. "This place has character. Our condo is beautiful, but it could belong to anyone." I thought those moments of vulnerability might bring us closer, but instead, they seemed to fuel a resentment that would soon explode into something I never saw coming. As the years passed, the neighborhood around my house began to change. What had once been a quietly prestigious area became Boston's hottest neighborhood. Property values soared as tech companies opened headquarters nearby and boutique shops replaced older businesses. The modest coffee shop on the corner became an artisanal espresso bar. The small grocery store transformed into a gourmet market selling imported cheeses and organic produce. My quiet street with its historic homes suddenly became prime real estate. And that's when everything changed. 3 years after inheriting Grandma's house, I received my property tax assessment and nearly choked on my morning coffee. The value had more than tripled since Grandma's passing. While this might sound like good news, on a public school teacher's salary, the increased taxes were going to be a strain. Still, I would make it work. This home meant everything to me. It was around this time that Madison's interest in the house intensified. Her casual visits became more frequent, often accompanied by comments that set my teeth on edge. "This dining room is wasted on just you," she remarked during Sunday dinner. "It could seat 12 comfortably. Do you ever even entertain?" Or, "These bedrooms are just collecting dust. Don't you feel guilty having all this space to yourself?" At first, I brushed off these comments, attributing them to her natural competitiveness. But then my parents began echoing similar sentiments. "Darling, it's such a large home for one person," my mother said during a family dinner at their suburban house. "And the upkeep must be exhausting with your teaching schedule." My father nodded in agreement. "Property taxes in that area are becoming astronomical. It might be wise to consider your options before it becomes a financial burden." I pushed the roasted potatoes around my plate. "I'm managing just fine. The house is important to me." Madison exchanged glances with our parents before clearing her throat. "Actually, I have some news that might change the conversation." She reached for Richard's hand, her diamond ring catching the light. "We're expecting again. Little Emma is going to be a big sister." The table erupted in congratulations. My parents immediately began discussing nursery themes and preschool wait lists. I offered my genuine congratulations too. Despite our differences, I loved being Aunt Sam to their 3-year-old daughter. But then Madison added, "With 2 children, we're really outgrowing the penthouse. There's no yard for them to play in, and the second bedroom will be too small for both kids as they grow." My mother seized the opening. "Samantha, wouldn't it be wonderful if your sister's children could grow up in the same house where you both spent so much time with your grandmother? Think of the legacy continuing." I nearly dropped my fork. "You want me to give Madison my house?" "Not give," my father interjected smoothly. "Sell. At a family rate, of course. You could buy a nice condo closer to your school with the proceeds. Much more manageable for someone in your position." I noticed Richard had barely spoken throughout this conversation. He sat sipping his wine, watching the family dynamics unfold with an unreadable expression. When our eyes met briefly, he quickly looked away. "I'm not selling Grandma's house," I said firmly. "I'm sorry Madison needs more space, but that home is where I plan to stay." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken only when my mother suggested we have dessert on the patio. The next day, I met my best friend Natalie for coffee and recounted the awkward dinner conversation. "They're ganging up on you," she said bluntly, stirring her latte. And the timing is suspicious. Your sister announces her pregnancy and suddenly everyone thinks you should give up your home? Something doesn't add up. Madison has always been the golden child, I sighed. She and my parents operate on the same wavelength: success, appearances, status. I've always been the family oddball who chose teaching over a real career, as my dad calls it. Natalie leaned forward. Has it occurred to you that there might be more to this than family dynamics? That neighborhood is red hot right now. Developers are paying a premium for any property they can get their hands on. You think Richard's company is interested in my block? I asked, suddenly remembering his silence during dinner. I'm just saying, it's worth paying attention. Richard didn't become CEO by missing opportunities. And from what you've told me about Madison, she's not exactly sentimental about the house itself, she just wants what you have. Natalie's warning stayed with me in the following weeks as the pressure from my family intensified. My parents called almost daily with new arguments for why I should be reasonable and sell to Madison. My mother invoked family duty, my father questioned my financial sense. Madison took a different approach. She began bringing Emma for visits, pointing out how much the little girl loved the window seat in the library and the hidden closet under the stairs. She could be so happy here, Madison would say wistfully. Both our children could have the childhood we had with Grandma. What Madison conveniently forgot was that we had those experiences while visiting Grandma. We didn't live in the house ourselves. Our childhood home had been a modern colonial in the suburbs. The emotional manipulation was becoming unbearable. But it was during one of these visits that I noticed something odd. Madison had stepped outside to take a call, and I overheard snippets of her conversation. Yes, Richard, I'm here now. No, she's not budging. I'm trying the approach we discussed. Don't worry, we'll get it done. When she returned, her expression was tense. Richard says hello, she said unconvincingly. He's just checking on our dinner plans. That evening, I Googled Blackwell Development and spent hours scrolling through their website, press releases, and news articles. That's when I found it, a small item in the business section of the Boston Globe mentioning Blackwell's purchase of 2 commercial properties on nearby Newberry Street. The article noted it was part of a larger development strategy in the area. My stomach nodded as pieces began falling into place. Could Richard's interest in my house be more than familial? Was my sister's CEO husband using family pressure to secure a valuable property for development? The thought kept me awake that night, staring at the ornate ceiling medallion above my bed, the same one Grandma Eleanor had looked up at for decades. I won't let them take this from you, I whispered to her memory. But I had no idea how far my family was willing to go. The text came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was grading papers in my classroom. My mother's message was brief and ominous: family meeting tonight. 7 p.m. Your father and I need to discuss something important. Madison will be there. Non-negotiable. The knot in my stomach tightened. In my family, non-negotiable was code for "we've already made a decision, and you're going to hear it whether you like it or not." I considered making an excuse, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. At 7:03 p.m., I knocked on my parents' door, deliberately arriving just late enough to make a point without seeming petty. My mother answered, her expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "We're in the living room," she said, leading me through their immaculate house where nothing was ever out of place. My father sat in his leather armchair, martini already in hand. Madison occupied one end of the sofa, leaving the uncomfortable antique chair. The one with the slightly wobbly leg and too firm cushion, for me. Richard was noticeably absent. "Where's Richard?" I asked, taking the unfortunate seat. "He had a board meeting," Madison replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "He sends his regrets." My father cleared his throat in that authoritative way he'd perfected over decades of corporate negotiations. "Samantha, we've asked you here because we've reached an impasse that needs resolution. Your mother and I have given this considerable thought, and we've decided it's time for decisive action regarding Eleanor's house." I noted how he called it Eleanor's house, not your house, already divorcing me from ownership in his language. Madison and Richard have made a generous offer, my mother continued, her voice taking on the soothing tone she used when delivering difficult news to clients. They're prepared to pay 60% of the current market value, which would give you a significant sum to invest in a new property more suited to your lifestyle. 60%? I echoed, disbelief making my voice rise. You're suggesting I sell my home at a 40% discount? Why would I ever agree to that? Madison leaned forward, her expression earnest in a way that seemed rehearsed. Sam, we know how much the house means to you. It means a lot to me too, those are our shared childhood memories. But Richard and I can offer something you can't, we can keep it in the family for generations. With 2 children, we'll fill those rooms with laughter again. The house needs that, don't you think? I stared at my sister, trying to reconcile the Madison I grew up with and this polished stranger using emotional manipulation with such practiced ease. The house already has laughter, I said quietly. It has my laughter, my friends' laughter, my students' laughter when they come for end-of-year celebrations. It's not empty or sad or whatever you're implying. My father set down his martini with a sharp click against the coaster. Samantha, we've been patient. We've given you time to see reason. But your selfishness is dividing this family. My selfishness? I repeated incredulously. Yes, my mother interjected. After all we've done for you, the education we provided, the opportunities we gave you, we expected more consideration for your sister's needs. I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up. What opportunities? You were hardly present for most of my childhood. Grandma Eleanor raised me while you were building your careers and grooming Madison to follow in your footsteps. The one thing, Grandma left specifically to me, and you want me to hand it over at a massive loss because Madison decided she wants it? It's not about want, Madison snapped, her composed facade cracking. It's about need. Richard and I need a family home. You're just one person. One person who owns her home outright, I countered. One person whose grandmother specifically wanted her to have that house. My father's expression hardened. Enough. We didn't call this meeting to debate. We called it to inform you of our decision. He straightened in his chair, his CEO posture taking over. You will accept Madison and Richard's offer, or there will be consequences. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Consequences? My mother's voice was cold now, her client-friendly tone abandoned. If you refuse to be reasonable about this, we'll have no choice but to reevaluate our relationship with you. You're, what? Threatening to disown me over a house? The words felt surreal leaving my mouth. We're asking you to consider what's truly important, my father replied. Family should come first. If you choose property over your sister's needs and our wishes, that tells us everything we need to know about your priorities. Madison's eyes glistened with what seemed like genuine tears. Please, Sam. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We can still be a family if you just cooperate. I stood up, my legs shaking. This isn't about family. This is about taking something that's mine because you want it. Grandma left me that house for a reason, and I'm not selling it, not to Madison, not to anyone, and certainly not at a 40% discount. My mother's face hardened. Then I suggest you take some time to consider what life will be like without your family's support. No holidays, no birthdays, no relationship with your niece or the new baby. Is your grandmother's house worth losing everything else? You're the ones making that choice, not me, I said, my voice breaking. And for the record, Grandma would be ashamed of all of you right now. I grabbed my purse and walked out, ignoring my mother's calls to come back and be reasonable. In my car, I finally allowed the tears to fall, great heaving sobs that made it impossible to drive for nearly 20 minutes. That night, the texts and calls began, not just from my parents and Madison, but from aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd been fed a carefully crafted version of events portraying me as the unreasonable, selfish sister denying a pregnant Madison her rightful family home. Your sister is having another baby. Have a heart. Family property should stay with the family member who will carry on the legacy. Your grandmother would want her great-grandchildren to grow up there. The coordinated attack was overwhelming. I turned off my phone and curled up in my grandmother's old reading chair, a quilt she'd made wrapped around my shoulders. What should I do, Grandma? I whispered to the empty room. They're taking everything from me if I don't give them your home. That night, I slept in her bedroom for the first time since her passing, needing to feel close to the one person who had truly seen and understood me. As moonlight filtered through the lace curtains she'd hung decades ago, I made my decision. I would not be bullied out of my home, even if it meant losing my family in the process. What I didn't know then was that the true motive behind their ultimatum was far more calculated than I could have imagined, and the evidence was right under my nose. The morning after the disastrous family meeting, I woke to the sound of voices outside my bedroom window. Pulling aside the curtains, I spotted two men in casual business attire studying the property across the street, gesturing and making notes on tablets. Nothing unusual there, properties in the neighborhood changed hands frequently these days. What caught my attention was the logo on one man's jacket, Blackwell Development. Richard's company. I watched them for several minutes, noting how they kept glancing toward my house while talking. When they moved further down the street, I quickly dressed and headed out for my morning coffee, taking a route that would casually pass them. "Morning," I said pleasantly as I approached. "Admiring the architecture?" The younger man smiled. "It's a beautiful neighborhood. Historic districts like this are rare finds. Are you looking to buy in the area?" I asked innocently. The older man, noticing his colleague's openness, stepped in. "Just conducting a survey for some clients interested in the neighborhood." "Are you a resident?" I nodded. "That's my house right there, the Victorian with the stained glass. Been in my family for generations." A flash of recognition crossed the older man's face, quickly masked. "Beautiful property. Well, we should continue. Have a nice day." As they walked away, I heard the younger man ask, "Isn't that the property Mr. Blackwell mentioned in the meeting yesterday?" Their voices faded before I could hear the response, but it confirmed my growing suspicion. Richard's interest in my house went beyond family sentimentality. Instead of continuing to the coffee shop, I turned and walked to the home of my neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, an 80-year-old retired history professor who missed nothing that happened on our street. "Samantha. What a pleasant surprise," he greeted me, inviting me in for tea. After some polite catching up, I broached the subject. "Have you noticed any unusual activity on the street lately? People surveying or examining properties?" Mr. Abernathy's bushy eyebrows rose. "Funny you should ask. There's been quite a bit of that over the past month. Men in suits, taking photographs and measurements. One fellow was particularly interested in the sight lines from your property to the corner." "Did any of them identify themselves?" He thought for a moment. "One introduced himself as working for Blackwell Development. Nice enough chap, said they were doing a neighborhood assessment." He paused. "Isn't that your brother-in-law's company?" "It is," I confirmed, my stomach sinking. "Did he mention what kind of assessment?" "No, but he was very interested when I mentioned the zoning variance the city granted for the block behind us last year. Something about height restrictions being relaxed." I thanked Mr. Abernathy and left with more questions than answers. On my way home, I called Jessica Porter, a friend from college who now worked in high-end real estate. "Jess, what do you know about Blackwell Development's current projects?" I asked when she answered. "Richard Blackwell's company? They're making big moves in your neighborhood, actually." "Why do you ask?" We arranged to meet for lunch, where Jessica brought her laptop and industry insights. Over salads at a quiet cafe, she pulled up several documents. "Blackwell has been systematically acquiring properties in a 2-block radius around you," she explained, showing me a map with highlighted parcels. "They now own approximately 80% of the real estate in this section." "For what purpose?" I asked, though I was beginning to see the pattern. Jessica pulled up an artist's rendering that made my blood run cold. It showed a gleaming high-rise luxury condominium complex with ground-floor retail, situated exactly where my block currently stood. My house, my grandmother's house, was completely erased, replaced by the cornerstone of this massive development. The Marlborough, Jessica read from the proposal. 60 luxury units, exclusive rooftop amenities, underground parking. Projected revenue of over 100 million. I stared at the image, feeling physically ill. Where did you get this? It was presented to select investors last month. A client shared it with me because he's interested in pre-construction purchasing. She zoomed in on the fine print. Look at the date, this has been in planning for over a year. A year. While Madison was visiting my house with increasingly transparent hints about wanting it, while my parents were beginning to pressure me, Richard had already been planning to demolish it. Is there anything else you can show me? I asked, my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. Jessica hesitated. This isn't officially public yet, but... She pulled up a permit application filed with the city. Blackwell applied for demolition and construction permits 2 months ago. The application includes your address. But he doesn't own my property, I said, confusion mixing with anger. The application states pending acquisition for your parcel. She looked at me sympathetically. Sam, did you have any idea? I'm starting to, I replied grimly. That evening, I drove to the county records office just before closing time. The clerk was reluctant to help until I explained I needed information about my own property. Searching through records, I discovered something startling. Richard's company had approached my grandmother about selling her house 6 months before she died. She had firmly rejected the offer. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Grandma's decision to specifically leave me the house, her comments about it needing someone who wouldn't see it as just an investment, she had known. I dug deeper, requesting records of all Blackwell Development's recent acquisitions. The pattern was clear. They had been buying property in the area for years, gradually assembling the pieces for their luxury development. My house was the final piece they needed, the corner lot that would complete their project footprint. I drove home in a daze, pieces falling into place. Madison's sudden interest in my house wasn't about family legacy or space for her children. It was about helping her husband secure a multi-million-dollar development deal. My parents' ultimatum wasn't about family loyalty, it was about pressuring me to sell at below market value so Richard's profit margins would be even higher. The betrayal cut deep, but it also ignited something in me, determination. This wasn't just about keeping my home anymore, it was about exposing their manipulation and standing up for myself. That night, I created a detailed file of everything I'd discovered, the development plans, the permit applications that included my property, the record of Richard approaching my grandmother, the property acquisitions surrounding my home, and the projected revenue from the Marlborough project. I added photos of the Blackwell Development employees surveying the neighborhood and notes from my conversation with Mr. Abernathy. Looking at the evidence spread across my dining room table. The same table where my grandmother had taught me to play cards and helped with my homework, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, I'd been the family peacekeeper, the one who compromised to avoid conflict. But Grandma Eleanor hadn't raised me to be a doormat. They picked the wrong house and the wrong woman, I said to my grandmother's portrait hanging on the wall. Tomorrow, I would stop being reactive and take control of this situation. It was time for my own family meeting. I spent the entire next day preparing. I organized my evidence into a clear, compelling presentation. I practiced what I would say, anticipating their reactions and preparing my responses. I even rearranged the living room furniture to ensure I would be in a position of control during the confrontation. Then I sent a group text to my parents and Madison. I've reconsidered our discussion. Let's meet at my house tomorrow at 7 p.m. to discuss the sale. Please come prepared to finalize details. The responses were immediate and triumphant. My mother, I'm so glad you're being sensible about this, dear. My father, smart decision, Samantha. Madison, thank you, Sam. You won't regret this. I didn't bother responding. They would discover my true intentions soon enough. At 6:55 p.m. the next evening, I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway, followed minutes later by Madison's SUV. I was surprised to see Richard emerge from the passenger side. This was the first time he had deigned to be involved in these family discussions. His presence confirmed my suspicions. With the prize seemingly within reach, he wanted to personally oversee the victory. I greeted them at the door with practiced calm, inviting them into the living room where Grandma Eleanor's portrait seemed to watch over the proceedings. I'd set out coffee and my grandmother's favorite teacups, but no food. This wasn't a social occasion. Before we begin discussing terms, I said once everyone was seated, I'd like to share some information I've discovered that might impact our negotiations. My father checked his watch impatiently. Let's not overcomplicate this, Samantha. You've made the right decision. We can have the papers drawn up by next week. Actually, I replied, I think you'll want to see this first. I opened the file folder on the coffee table and removed the first document, the artist's rendering of the Marlborough development. I placed it in the center of the table where everyone could see it. There was a moment of confused silence before Madison spoke. What is this? This, I said evenly, is what's actually behind your sudden interest in my house. It's not about family legacy or space for your children. It's about this. I tapped the luxury development image. Richard's company's newest project. Richard's face had gone very still, his eyes darting between the rendering and my face. My parents looked confused, but Madison's expression was genuine shock. I don't understand, she said, leaning forward to examine the image. Richard, what is this? Before he could answer, I continued, laying out document after document. Blackwell Development has spent the last 3 years buying up properties around mine. My house is the final piece they need for this development. A development that would be worth over $100 million. I turned to Richard directly. You approached my grandmother about selling 6 months before she died, didn't you? When she refused, you decided to try a different approach, using my sister and parents to pressure me instead. Richard's face had paled, but his voice remained steady. This is a business matter that has nothing to do with our family discussion. It has everything to do with it, I countered, pulling out the permit applications. You filed these 2 months ago, listing my property as pending acquisition. You were so confident that your family pressure campaign would work that you already started the official process. My mother took the papers with trembling hands. Richard, is this true? Of course it's a good investment property, Richard said smoothly. That's why we want to keep it in the family. Madison and I can renovate. Stop lying, I interrupted, my voice sharp. These plans show my house being demolished to make way for your luxury condos. You never intended to live here or preserve anything. Madison turned to her husband, her face flushing with anger. You told me we were buying Sam's house to raise our family. You said Emma would have the same childhood we had with Grandma. Richard's composure finally cracked. Don't be naive, Madison. That house is worth millions in the right development. We'd be fools to use it as a single-family residence. So you lied to me? Madison's voice rose. You used me to pressure my sister? Made me the bad guy? I was creating an opportunity for all of us, Richard insisted. Once the development is complete, the return on investment would benefit everyone. Your sister would receive fair compensation. 60% of market value is not fair compensation, I interjected. Especially when you stand to make millions from the development. My father, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Richard, did you manipulate this situation for your business interests? Richard straightened his tie, switching to his CEO persona. Gordon, you're a businessman. You understand that opportunities sometimes require creative approaches. Yes, the property has development potential, but that doesn't change the fact that it makes sense for Madison and me to acquire it. By threatening to cut me off from the family? I asked. By having my parents tell me I'll never see them again if I don't sell to you at a massive discount? My mother gasped. We never said. You absolutely did, I cut in. You said if I didn't accept Madison and Richard's offer, you would reevaluate our relationship. That I would lose holidays, birthdays, and any relationship with Emma and the new baby. Those were your exact words. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Richard, you told us Samantha was being unreasonable about a fair market offer. You said nothing about development plans or demolition. The business aspects weren't relevant to the family discussion, Richard replied, his tone dismissive. Weren't relevant? Madison stood up, hands protectively covering her pregnant belly. You used our unborn child as a manipulation tactic. You made me beg my sister for a house she planned to tear down. The room erupted into chaos. Madison shouting at Richard, my parents demanding explanations, Richard attempting to regain control of the situation with corporate doublespeak about mutually beneficial opportunities and family investment potential. I let the storm rage for several minutes before I stood up, my quiet movement somehow cutting through the noise. I think it's time for all of you to leave my house, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. Samantha, we had no idea, my mother began, her eyes pleading. Maybe not about the development plans, I acknowledged. But you were willing to cut me out of the family to get what you wanted. That's not love or family loyalty, that's manipulation and conditional affection. We need to discuss this further, my father insisted, looking more shaken than I'd ever seen him. No, we don't. Not tonight. I walked to the front door and opened it. I think we all need time to process what's happened here. Richard was the first to move toward the door, his face a mask of barely contained fury. This isn't over, Samantha. That property is too valuable to be wasted on sentiment. Threatening me isn't a good look right now, Richard, I replied calmly. Especially with witnesses. Madison followed, pausing beside me. Sam, her voice broke. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the development. I met her eyes. But you were still willing to take my home and let our parents disown me. That's something we'll have to deal with another day. My parents were the last to leave, both looking years older than when they'd arrived. My mother tried to hug me, but I stepped back. We thought we were helping Madison, she whispered. We didn't know about Richard's plans. You should have trusted that Grandma knew what she was doing when she left me this house, I replied. You should have respected my right to keep what's legally mine without threatening to cut me out of the family. After they left, I closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing myself to shake with the emotion I'd been suppressing. I'd stood my ground, exposed the truth, and faced down the people who had tried to manipulate me. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that my own family had been willing to go to such lengths. I walked slowly through the quiet rooms of my grandmother's house, running my fingers along the familiar woodwork, feeling the history in every corner. For the first time since inheriting it, I truly understood why Grandma Eleanor had been so specific about leaving it to me. She hadn't just been giving me a house. She'd been giving me the strength of my own convictions. I did it, Grandma, I whispered to the empty rooms. I stood up for myself. For us. But as the adrenaline of confrontation faded, I was left with an uncomfortable question: what happened now? My family relationships lay in ruins around me. Richard's company still owned most of the surrounding properties. And I was still alone in a house too full of memories and now, fresh pain. What I didn't know then was that this painful evening would ultimately lead to healing I never expected, and from the most unlikely source. For a week after the confrontation, silence descended from my family's side. No calls, no texts, no emails, just the heavy quiet of broken relationships and exposed lies. I threw myself into end-of-year activities at school, grateful for the distraction of field trips and final projects that kept me too busy to dwell on my family's situation during daylight hours. The nights were harder. I'd wander through the rooms of my house, simultaneously finding comfort in its familiar embrace and aching with fresh awareness of what it had cost me. Had I made the right choice? Would I spend holidays alone from now on, the price of keeping these walls and floors and memories? On the 8th day of silence, my doorbell rang just as I was grading the last batch of science tests. Through the peephole, I saw Madison standing on my porch, alone and looking uncharacteristically disheveled. I hesitated before opening the door. "Madison. Can I come in?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Please, Sam. I just need to talk." I stepped aside to let her enter, noticing how she moved carefully, her pregnancy more visible than the last time I'd seen her. She looked around the entryway as if seeing it with new eyes. "Is Richard with you?" I asked, scanning the street behind her. "No." She pressed her lips together. "Richard is not in the picture right now." I led her to the kitchen. Always the heart of the house, where Grandma had taught us both to bake cookies and make preserves from garden berries. Madison sank into a chair at the worn oak table while I put the kettle on for tea, falling into the familiar rhythm of hospitality despite the tension between us. "I've left him," she blurted out as I set a steaming mug in front of her. "Or asked him to leave, technically, since the penthouse is in both our names." I sat across from her, surprised. "Because of what happened here?" Madison nodded, tears filling her eyes. "That was just the final straw. There have been problems for a while. Things I ignored or excused because I was so focused on having the perfect life." She cradled the mug between her hands. "When I saw those development plans, when I realized he'd been lying to me, using our children as pawns in his business deals, something just broke, Sam. I couldn't keep pretending anymore." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, seeing my sister in pain brought no satisfaction. "No, I'm sorry," she countered, meeting my eyes directly. "I was horrible to you. I let jealousy and greed cloud everything. When Grandma left you this house, I was so angry, not because I wanted to live here, but because once again, you were the special one, the one who connected with her in ways I never could." "That's not true, Madison. Grandma loved you too." "I know she did. But she understood you. You both share that. I don't know, that ability to find joy in simple things, to value stories and memories over status." Madison wiped at her tears. "I always felt like the outsider when you two were together, laughing about garden mishaps or some old book you'd both read." The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to absorb her words as I poured hot water over tea bags. I'd never considered that Madison might have felt excluded rather than disinterested in my relationship with our grandmother. "I thought you were like Mom and Dad," I admitted, returning to the table. "Career-focused, success-driven. I assumed you didn't want the messy, sentimental parts of family life." Madison gave a watery laugh. "I thought that's what I wanted too. The executive husband, the luxury lifestyle, the envy of others. But it's so empty, Sam. So goddamn empty. Do you know Richard and I haven't had dinner without his phone buzzing with urgent business calls in over a year? That Emma asks for her nanny when she's hurt because she sees her more than either of us?" I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the familiar shape of my sister's fingers despite the expensive manicure and diamond rings that made her seem like a stranger in recent years. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Stay with Mom and Dad temporarily, I guess. Try to figure out if there's anything worth salvaging with Richard, for the children's sake if nothing else." She squeezed my hand. "I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. For the jealousy, the manipulation, for not standing up to Richard or our parents when they threatened to cut you off." We talked for hours that night, really talked, in a way we hadn't since childhood. Madison shared her fears about being a single mother, her regrets about choosing a partner based on status rather than character. I admitted my loneliness in the big house sometimes, my struggles to afford its upkeep on a teacher's salary, my occasional doubts about foregoing a more lucrative career. "You know," Madison said as midnight approached, "I think Grandma knew exactly what she was doing when she left you this house. She knew you'd fight for it, that you'd refuse to be bullied or bought. She was giving you more than property, she was giving you a chance to stand up for yourself." Her words echoed my own thoughts so closely that tears sprang to my eyes. That sounds like something she would do. 2 days later, my parents called. The conversation was awkward, halting, full of long pauses and careful phrasing. But beneath the discomfort was a current of genuine remorse. "We were wrong," my father finally said, the words clearly difficult for a man who prided himself on being right. "We should never have threatened your place in this family over property." "We got caught up in Madison's needs and Richard's confidence," my mother added. "We convinced ourselves we were doing what was best for everyone, but we were really just bullying you into giving up something that's rightfully yours." The apologies didn't instantly heal the breach of trust, but they opened a door that had seemed permanently closed the night of our confrontation. We agreed to move forward slowly, to rebuild our relationship with clearer boundaries and greater respect for each other's choices. Meanwhile, Madison's separation from Richard became public when she filed for divorce the following month. The news rippled through Boston's business community, with speculation about how it might affect Blackwell Development's projects. I wasn't surprised when Richard called me directly, his tone all business. "I'm prepared to make you a legitimate offer for the property," he said without preamble. "Full market value plus 10%. "The house isn't for sale, Richard," I replied. "Not to you, not to anyone. Don't be foolish, Samantha. That development is moving forward with or without your participation. You'll find yourself living next to a construction zone for the next 3 years. Then I'll plant some extra flowers to brighten the view," I told him before ending the call. What Richard didn't know was that his aggressive acquisition strategy had caught the attention of the Neighborhood Preservation Society. When I shared what I'd discovered about the development plans, my neighbors mobilized with surprising speed and effectiveness. Mr. Abernathy connected me with local historians who documented the architectural significance of our block. Jessica, my real estate friend, helped identify zoning regulations that could be leveraged to challenge Blackwell's permits. Other neighbors, many of whom I'd barely known before, came forward with stories and photographs chronicling the historical importance of the area. Within weeks, we'd submitted a formal application for enhanced historical district protection. The city council scheduled public hearings, where longtime residents testified about the neighborhood's cultural value. Local media picked up the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath battle between preservation and development. Through it all, I found myself growing closer to Madison, who surprisingly became one of my strongest allies. Her insider knowledge of Richard's business practices proved invaluable to our preservation efforts, and her public support of our cause lent credibility that influenced key decision-makers. "He's furious, you know," she told me one evening as we sat on my front porch, watching Emma chase fireflies in the small garden. "The investors are getting nervous about all the negative publicity." "Are you okay with that?" I asked, aware that her divorce proceedings were ongoing. Madison considered the question as she absently rubbed her growing belly. "I think I'm finding my own voice for the first time in years. It feels right." As summer turned to fall, Madison accepted my offer to stay in one of the guest bedrooms until after the baby arrived. The arrangement raised eyebrows among those who knew about the family drama, but it made perfect sense to us. The house had plenty of space, and there was something healing about her presence in these rooms that held so many shared memories. In October, the City Council voted unanimously to grant enhanced historical protection to our neighborhood, effectively blocking Blackwell Development's high-rise plans. Richard's company was forced to sell several properties at a loss, and rumors circulated about investor lawsuits. I felt no satisfaction in his professional troubles, only relief that Grandma Eleanor's home, and those of my neighbors, were safe from demolition. The victory wasn't about defeating Richard, it was about preserving something valuable that might otherwise have been lost to profit motives. One crisp November morning, Madison went into labor 3 weeks early. I drove her to the hospital, held her hand through contractions, and witnessed the birth of my niece Ellie, named, Madison told me through exhausted tears, after our grandmother. As I watched Madison cradle her newborn daughter in the hospital room, surrounded by flowers and balloons from our cautiously supportive parents, I realized how completely our family dynamics had shifted in just 6 months. The house that had nearly torn us apart was now sheltering a new generation, not as a possession to be fought over but as a home where healing could begin. "She has Grandma's eyes," I whispered, touching Ellie's tiny hand with my finger. Madison smiled up at me. "And hopefully her spirit too." 6 months after the city council's vote to protect our neighborhood, spring returned to Boston. Cherry blossoms dotted the trees along Commonwealth Avenue, and tulips pushed through the soil in my small garden, planted by my grandmother decades ago and still returning faithfully each year. The preservation order had completely transformed Blackwell Development's plans. Unable to build their luxury high-rise, they'd been forced to adapt, eventually selling most of their properties to a company specializing in historically sensitive renovations. The few buildings they kept were being converted into boutique offices and upscale apartments that maintained their original facades and character, a compromise between preservation and progress that most residents found acceptable. Richard himself had faced significant professional consequences. Several investors had withdrawn from his company after the failed development and the negative publicity surrounding it. Though still wealthy and connected, his reputation had suffered a blow from which it might take years to recover. Madison's divorce was finalized in early April. She received a generous settlement that reflected both her years with Richard and his desire to avoid further public scrutiny of their separation. She remained in my home, now truly our home in many ways, with Emma and baby Ellie, transforming the third floor into a comfortable apartment for her little family while I maintained my space on the main and second floors. "Are you sure you're okay with this arrangement?" she asked one evening as we shared dinner in the kitchen. "I've been looking at condos, and there's one available in Back Bay that might work for us." I looked around the kitchen where we'd spent countless hours as children watching our grandmother bake, where Madison now prepared organic baby food for Ellie, where Emma had her own special step stool to help with cookie making. "I'm more than okay with it," I assured her. "This house was always meant for family. Besides, I like having you all here." It was true. After years of rattling around the big house alone, I'd grown accustomed to the sounds of little feet upstairs, to Emma's colorful artwork adorning the refrigerator, to adult conversation over evening tea. The house felt alive again in ways it hadn't since Grandma Eleanor's passing. My parents, true to their word, had been working to rebuild our relationship. They visited regularly, bringing treats for their granddaughters and making genuine efforts to connect with me without criticism or judgment. My father had even started helping with house maintenance projects, applying his perfectionist tendencies to repairing loose floorboards and squeaky hinges. "Your grandmother would be pleased," he said one Saturday as we repainted the porch railing together. "She always said this place needed a patriarch who respected its character instead of trying to modernize everything." Coming from my forward-thinking, technology-embracing father, this was a significant admission. I hid my smile as I handed him another paintbrush. "She'd be even more pleased that you're using the original color she chose in 1985, I replied. The neighborhood itself had experienced a renaissance following our preservation victory. Property values stabilized at high but not astronomical levels. Small businesses returned to nearby streets as commercial rents became more reasonable. The sense of community that had formed during our campaign against Blackwell development continued to flourish, with block parties and garden tours becoming regular events. In recognition of our efforts, the Neighborhood Association asked me to lead a history project documenting the area's architectural and cultural significance. I accepted enthusiastically, seeing it as the perfect way to honor my grandmother's legacy. The project launched with an exhibition in the local library, featuring photographs, documents, and oral histories from longtime residents. To my surprise, my classroom teaching skills transferred perfectly to giving weekend tours of historical homes and organizing educational workshops for children interested in local history. Madison attended the opening night, proudly pushing Ellie's stroller and holding Emma's hand. "You found your calling," she observed as we watched visitors examine the exhibits. "Teaching history instead of just science. I think I'm finally understanding why Grandma was so passionate about preservation," I admitted. "It's not just about old buildings, it's about the stories they hold, the continuity they provide." As summer approached, Madison surprised me by suggesting we convert part of the small backyard into a vegetable garden like the one our grandmother had maintained. Emma needs to learn where food comes from, she explained as we paged through seed catalogs. And I could use a hobby that doesn't involve spreadsheets or investment portfolios. I studied my sister, my formerly status-conscious, appearance-focused sister, now enthusiastically planning to dig in dirt and grow tomatoes. The transformation in her went far beyond the superficial changes of trading designer suits for comfortable jeans and natural makeup. There was a groundedness to Madison now, a contentment I'd never seen in her before. "What?" she asked, catching me staring. "I'm just thinking about how much has changed in a year," I replied honestly. If someone had told me last summer that we'd be living together and planning a garden, I would have thought they were crazy. Madison smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes we need to lose what we think we want to find what we actually need." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was being terrible." "That's what sisters do," I said simply. That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, I sat on the porch swing watching fireflies begin their nightly dance in the garden. The sounds of Madison reading Emma a bedtime story drifted through an open upstairs window, accompanied by Ellie's occasional happy gurgles. I thought about all that had transpired since my parents delivered their ultimatum almost exactly 1 year ago. The pain and betrayal, the confrontation and discoveries, the unexpected alliances and healing. Through it all, this house, this structure of wood and glass and memories, had remained a constant, sheltering me through storms both literal and emotional. But the true lesson hadn't been about the house itself. It had been about standing firm in my convictions, about recognizing manipulation and refusing to be its victim, about valuing myself enough to establish boundaries even with those I loved. Grandma Eleanor had known what she was doing all along. The house wasn't just a valuable property in a gentrifying neighborhood, it was a test. Would I fight for what was rightfully mine? Would I recognize my own worth? Would I have the courage to stand alone if necessary? "You were right, Grandma," I whispered to the evening air. "Sometimes the greatest gift isn't the thing itself, but what you learn about yourself in protecting it." The porch light illuminated a moth that fluttered nearby, reminding me of something my grandmother once said: "Home isn't just where you live, it's where you belong." Some folks spend their whole lives looking for that place, while others are lucky enough to be born to it. I had been lucky indeed. Not just in inheriting this beautiful old house, but in rediscovering the true meaning of family within its walls. Not the conditional acceptance my parents had initially offered, not the jealous competition that had characterized my relationship with Madison for years, but the genuine support and love that had eventually emerged from our crisis. The house had never been just mine, I realized. It had always been waiting for this moment, for children's laughter to echo through its rooms again, for family dinners at the big oak table, for the garden to sprout new life under caring hands. My grandmother's gift hadn't been the house itself but the journey it had forced me to take, leading ultimately to this peaceful moment of belonging. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this tale of family drama and ultimate healing resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Remember, sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with the people we love most, but often, those boundaries lead to healthier, more authentic relationships in the end. Thank you for joining me today, and may you always find the courage to protect what matters most to you.